Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 12 is where we will pick up. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 12. We looked at 1 through 11 last time, and does somebody want to summarize, sort of give us how the book opens up, what Solomon's talking about here? Any thoughts? How about chapter 1 verse 2? Ron?
As it clearly states, he's describing to us the vanity of this life as he has made an assessment of it. And he is describing here for us, what the things we do in this life, that we shouldn't have an expectation greater than what it is. For instance, our work and our toil is for a purpose, to sustain us, to provide to our needs, and as we understand, to provide to those who might be lacking. But we shouldn't make that the totality of our life. He wants us to understand the things that are really of value. Right.
He's looking very broadly here at the beginning of chapter 1 at the world, the way the world is, life under the sun, as we view it, as we stand on this earth and we look out and we observe things, we see things. But what is it out there that gives life meaning and purpose, and how do things appear? And he talks about these cycles. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, the wind blows around, the water, it rains from the sky, it goes into rivers that flow into the ocean, and the oceans are not full. It's just this big, massive cycle that goes on and on. And talking about this idea, there's nothing new under the sun. When we look at life, when we look at mankind, we look at human nature, the behavior of people, situations, there's nothing new that we're going to be able to point to and say, hey, this is something different. Nobody has ever experienced this before, gone through these things before. Sort of like 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, no temptation is overtaking you, except such as is common to man. We can't look at the temptations we face and say, well, nobody understands. Nobody gets where I am or what's happened to me. They just don't understand. No, somebody understands, because somebody's been through that before. And so there's nothing new under the sun. When you go through the entirety of the book and you see him talking about all these things he did, all he experienced, the things that he observed going through, lessons that were learned, nobody's going to come along and school Solomon and inform him in some way, well, you know what? I have something you missed here, Solomon. We're not going to do that. In chapter 1, verse 11, it says, there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. As we discussed before, man is transitory in this world. We have very little impact in this world. We're not going to make a lot of changes. Life is a vapor. We come, we go. We seek meaning in life. And as he goes through the book, some of the things he touches on, people seek meaning in power. They seek it in glory. They seek it in fortunes. They seek it in pleasure. They look for it in all these different places, all while we are steadily and relentlessly and irreversibly headed where?
To the grave.
We are headed to the grave. Nobody is ever going to prevent that. The only exception to that is going to be what? Christ comes before we die. Then, as 1 Corinthians chapter 15 says, we'll be changed in a moment of the twinkling of an eye. But other than that, everybody is going to die. And so why are we here? What's the purpose? What's life all about? How do we find a peace and contentment in this world? That's really what he's driving at here. So let's read verses 12 to 18 as he's discussing this idea of figuring out about life. So Ecclesiastes 1, 12 to 18. Who will grab that for us? Charles?
Idle creature was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the Son of Man, by which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. I commune with my heart, saying, Look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know manhood and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in which wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow.
Okay. Question 1, I asked you to discuss and illustrate how Solomon is credible on the subject of wisdom, including its vanity. Do you have any thoughts along that? How's he credible on wisdom?
He asked God for it,
Okay.
and God gave him great wisdom.
God gave him great wisdom. What about his understanding of the vanity of wisdom? Okay, he lived it. Anything more specific on that? That's exactly right.
But, I mean, he got later in his life and he was rebuked by God, and he saw the retrospect everything that he had done and was still doing, and he started writing, inspired by the Holy Spirit.
All that wisdom, these knowledge of things in this world ultimately didn't do him any good.
The part that you were asking if I understood right, God imparted wealth to him, in measure.
Mm-hmm.
And in that wealth, he exercised his own will to fulfill every desire. So he had the wisdom, and he had things that this life could render in terms of the pleasures of this life. So he has an excellent vantage point to declare the sum total of all of these things.
Right. He had the intelligence and the means to do whatever he wanted to do. And he pursued so many different things. And he says, I've been there, I've done that, and here's what you need to know about it. Right? Here in verses 13 and 14, he's laying out that the pursuit of wisdom about life is a burdensome thing. It's a heavy thing and burdensome, difficult. It stinks, is maybe how we would put it. This just stinks because it's not what you would think it to be. Some people idealize these types of things. It's a never-ending task is one of the things that he's pointing out. It just goes on and on and on. Can you know all things about all things? And even Solomon didn't know all things about all things, right? He had a lot of wisdom, but we can't know all things about all things. What do Eastern religions tell us? What's their idea of nirvana?
Sun and the moon they worship.
They may have some of that, but there's something sort of key to the Eastern religions along what we're talking about here.
They seek a perfect enlightenment, perfect wisdom.
Yes, perfect wisdom, perfect enlightenment. It's illustrated maybe with the idea, well, you're seeking the meaning of life, then you go on this great journey and go through this experience and maybe even travel to a far place and talk to some guru who's figured out the meaning of life. And you get there and they'll help you out, and then you understand what everything's about, and then you're at one with the universe. Solomon's laying bare that lie. No. It doesn't matter what kind of knowledge you attain as far as life under the sun. That's not going to do it for you. That is not life's purpose and life's meaning. And it's interesting here that he says that this task of pursuing this wisdom God has given the sons of men. The Expositor's Bible Commentary made note that it wasn't given to animals. I thought that was very perceptive. Animals don't sit around and contemplate the meaning of life, right? Chimpanzees, dolphins, whatever. They don't sit around and think about what's life about. They just act on instinct. They act on drive. They act on their nature. We don't do that. We're different from them. We explore. We try to figure things out. We sit and we just meditate and contemplate life, its purpose, and all different kinds of meanings. And it's a fact that he didn't implant wisdom into us, this understanding at birth. We have to learn it. We have to pursue these things and learn these things. And so he talks about all these things that are done under the sun, and it's like grasping for the wind. What is grasping for the wind? What's that imagery he's giving us?
Reaching for something we can't ever
Okay. If you reach out, you try to grab the wind, what have you got? You can't ever do that. But it's pointless. Why would you do that? Why would you put everything on that, if you will? So, question number 2, I asked you to give some examples of the crooked that cannot be made straight and what it means for us. What's he saying? What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be numbered.
Stephen, in considering this, I discovered that there are different views that some people take. Some look at this as a reflection upon the things of nature and what God has created and changing or altering the course of those things, which may be also a true recognition. However, in this, if we think about what he's talking about in the preceding verses, he's talking about the things of wisdom, and like you were saying, how exhausting it is for us to try to understand the nature of this life. And for us, we have lived through a period of disruptive living with the virus and the COVID and all those things. And we're trying to make our path straight through this. We're trying to sort it out, and we're not doing a good job of it because the things we know that just aren't so, and we always are learning and discovering additional ideas. But the idea then that I'm trying to get to is that, we observe these things, we see the irregularities in life, we see the wants in life that are about us, and we are trying to bring about, an understanding and, if you will, reason through it or rationalize it. But the thing is that what God has set in order, man himself doesn't have the wisdom to change or to alter. The effects of life come upon us, and we just have to deal with that.
Right. John?
Well, to go along with what Ron's saying, I think that you could throw in there's always going to be lazy people, there's always going to be hardworking people, there's always going to be poor people, there's always going to be rich people. And just because you have wisdom, you can give every dime that you have, but there's always going to be poor people. It's never going to end. And just because you have knowledge of it doesn't change the fact. It's those crooked things, the wrongs of this life are always going to happen, no matter what, no matter how good you are, no matter how rich you are, no matter how hardworking you are. There are things that happen that we judge as wrong, and they're not fair. It's always going to happen.
Okay. To one point he mentioned there, I think it was in the past 2 or 3 months, somebody was talking about ending world hunger, and, Elon Musk should cash out his money and give it to end world hunger. And I forget what he said. Was it $10 billion he said he would give, something like that? If you give me a rational plan how to end world hunger, I'll give you $10 billion right now. Well, Elon Musk could give $200 billion. it's not going to end world hunger. It's just an utterly foolish pursuit because of what John's talking about. You know, you just look at all these things in life. There's always going to be rich. There's always going to be poor. Jesus specifically said you always have the poor. They're always with you. That's never going to change. And, you know, why was I born in the United States and not in the Philippines? I have wondered that. Why? Am I ever going to figure that out? No, it's crooked. Because I see brethren over there with hearts of gold and me over here, I take so much for granted and they're thankful for a bowl of rice every day. I would not be thankful for that. I'm just telling you, that would be a struggle for me. But, you know, how do you figure all that out? How do you figure out natural disasters? Why does a tornado go through, rip up one home, and kill the entire family in there, and the people across the street, they've got limbs in their yard? I can't figure all that out. I can't explain all that. Why does one person get cancer and another person doesn't? Why can one person smoke for 70 years and never have any issues? And another person, they don't do it and they come down with lung cancer. I cannot explain that. What's crooked can't be made straight. We're not going to figure all these things out as they've been talking about, Mike.
Yeah, we can surmise what we think and what we feel and our experience and all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what the book of Job is about also. And, you know, so we kind of have some of that answer here on what Job and his friends were talking about. You know, that it's just the way life is. It's life under the sun.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, like you said, you know, Tanner were talking the other day about the different forms of government, economies, you know, and stuff like that. As you pointed out, you're never going to be able to end world hunger. You may be able to feed somebody, but the next generation comes along and just starts right back over.
You can take all the money away from every person that has $1 million or more and give it to every person that doesn't have that. And within about, I would say, 5 to 10 years, it would totally go back. Just completely.
Because of greed, because of sin that we have.
There's so many different things in there. Yeah. And he says, so what's crooked can't be made straight. What is lacking cannot be numbered. You cannot count something you don't have. Right? You got 6 apples. You can't count any more than 6 apples if that's all you got. That's just it. You can't know what you don't know that you don't know. Right?
But you also can't change the facts of life.
No.
No matter how smart you are, you can't change it.
Okay, you can try to defy gravity, and you can get on a rocket ship, blah, 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 blah. You're not going to get rid of gravity. You're just not going to change that. There are some things in this world that you're just never, ever going to change. Ron, do you have something?
Yeah, along with what you and John are saying, you know, the idea is where there is nothing, nothing can be added to it because it's void, it's absent.
Right, exactly right. Zach.
Solomon repeats this thought in chapter 7 and in verse 13. Consider the work of God. For who is able to straighten what he has bent, which is the same Hebrew of to make it crooked. In the day of prosperity, be happy. But in the day of adversity, consider, God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not discover anything that will be after him. So it's the same thought that is in this passage we're discussing now. The futility of wisdom in chapter 1, and then the comparison between wisdom and folly in chapter 7. We're not going to have any ability to affect change for what God has set in order.
Yeah, he set up.
We can't undo what's been done. We're not going to affect the future if that's what God's will is for those specific things to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's set up the world the way it is, and man's not going to come along and change that. He's simply not going to do it. Now, question number 3, I misworded that. I had asked, why is there much wisdom in the grief? It's much grief in wisdom. I hope you caught that. But why is there much grief in wisdom?
Because you understand the wrongs, you understand the consequences, you
And sometimes you see the far-reaching consequences of somebody's decision. You understand that somebody's decisions affect more than themselves. And so the more you understand about that, the more grief there is, because you can see the sorrow that's coming, even if the people involved do not see the sorrow that's coming. So once you understand those things, you can't be ignorant of them.
Yeah. He prefaces that portion there with verses 16 and 17, where he says, you know, I've gained knowledge and wisdom about life. I've investigated things, practical experience, and gone through all of this. And here's what's at the end of that road. And as Nancy's saying, you know, there's grief in here. Greater wisdom means you more easily see the folly of life. Where other people are just going along and they don't understand it, you understand where that issue is, and you can see it coming down the road, as she was talking about. And greater wisdom brings more responsibility. Boy, that weighs down on you. Zach?
I think another part of this is the more you find out about, as John put it, I think it was both John and Ron, the irregularities, the unfairness of life, the more you realize those things are out there, the more you also realize how limited you are to really make a difference. Maybe in your realm of influence, in your family, in your community, in your congregation, whatever that may be. Even Solomon, in his grandeur, probably didn't really do a whole lot to affect the world problems that were around him. Though he knew a lot about it, he was very limited in what he could probably do to make those things go away.
The additional aspect of that, when you're talking about responsibility, you learn things that you just didn't want to know. And I would say a very good example of that is an eldership. Learn things individually about people that you really didn't want to know. And that's a grief. That is a genuine grief. And so when people come to you with their problems, which is what we should be doing, you learn a lot that you just didn't want to know. But they come to you because you have understanding or you have wisdom in an area, or they believe that you do.
Right, and like Solomon tries to do really through the book, it's what elders, what parents, what all members of the church should be doing. Point to God and God's wisdom. We need to look to Him to figure out things in life, to get through challenges and issues of life. And when Solomon's going through this, when he's talking about this wisdom, at this point he's talking about a general wisdom that's derived from knowledge and experience in a variety of areas. Later on, he's going to come back at the latter part of chapter 2 and talk about more academic wisdom that he goes after. John, do you have something?
Well, just in reading this, he may have already touched on this, I may not be listening, but it's kind of it's not humorous, but sad humor that he says that he knows folly and he knows wisdom. But is there really any difference between? Because the wisdom causes him, what is it called here? Folly and madness. I apply my heart to know wisdom and to know folly and madness, and I perceive that striving after the wind. Basically, he's saying there's no difference between them because all the wisdom will drive you mad.
Right. Yeah, really throughout this book, when he's talking from that perspective, you know, life under the sun, the wisdom that is here, you know, folly and madness, and he makes a lot of comparisons through the book about, you know, here's the fool, here's the wise man. Same thing happens to both of them. So really, where does that really help you in the end of these things? But again, I want to reemphasize, Solomon is not a fatalistic guy, and he's not writing that life is just futile, just give up. That's not what he's talking about. He's saying, here's the reality, here's what you need to know. You need to have that proper, sober perspective on life. So Nancy, go ahead.
On that note, that's one of the things about Ecclesiastes that I love, is that it tells you whatever it is that you're going through or that is going on, it's always been, it's always going to be, it's normal. It's normal. To me, that's comforting. It's not that things are totally out of control. It's that this is the way it's always been under the sun. And one of the things that's comforting is when something occurs, you're not the first and you won't be the last. It's just going to happen again and again as long as people are on this earth.
Okay, back to Ron's point a while ago, the insanity of the past 2 years. All kinds of things, from the actual virus itself to policies and reactions and impacts, and everything's affected the economies and business and families and all kinds of stuff, and huge political fights. Do you think we're the first nation that's ever gone through that? We're not. We're not. And you know what? We'll get through it one way or another. Not saying it's just going to disappear. There won't be long-lasting impacts, but you know, there are nations, whether Israel or Babylon or, you know, Great Britain, the British Empire, or whatever. People have been through things like this before. And regardless of the circumstances, you have to keep your faith and your focus on God. That's where we need to have our minds, instead of getting distracted by all the issues and problems. Let's read chapter 2, verses 1 through 11 now. Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 11, as we look at Solomon pursuing pleasures to find meaning. Who will read that for us? Philip.
Said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold upon folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. I made my works great. I built myself houses, and I planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants, and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. But I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on all the labor which I had toiled. And indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun.
Okay. So questions 4 and 5 deal really with this entire section, to list as many things you can. So I'll investigate it, and then Bible passages that show some of the pursuit of these things. So we'll just step through these, and you can reference your question sheets as we go through it. First of all, verses 1 and 2, what is he saying that he pursued and went after?
I put comedy and parties.
Okay. Mirth, comedy, wit, if you will. Is it bad to laugh and enjoy things? Is that what he's saying? Is he saying you shouldn't laugh and enjoy things? Proverbs 17:22. Proverbs 17:22. What does he say there?
A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bone.
Okay. A joyful heart, a merry heart. there's a place for laughter, for enjoyment. We very often among ourselves, we cut up and things like that. That's perfectly fine in and of itself. No issues, no problems. But what happens with the laughter? What does he say there, verse 2? Laughter is madness. Mirth. Folly. What does it accomplish? Ultimately, what does it do? Where do we see this in our society, maybe? Anybody ever watch a sitcom? Situation comedy on TV, a sitcom? Do you know people that binge sitcoms day in and day out, day in and day out? They live for that. There are people, and I've known some people, a few people through my life, you could not have a serious moment with them. Just absolutely all the time wanted to laugh, wanted to cut up, wanted something funny. If they weren't laughing, they didn't want a part of any of it. And so he says, look, is life really about, laughing makes you feel good, so is that what life's about? And he pursued it. He says it's madness. There's no value in that. How about verse 3? What does he go after? Mike, go ahead. Yeah.
Other point about what you started on in Proverbs Chapter 14, in verse 13, it says, even in laughter the heart may ache, and even in joy may be grief. So it's kind of the same thing. You can laugh all you want to, that doesn't necessarily mean what's wrong with inside is actions.
How many times have you been at a visitation of a funeral and people, including the families, laughing? Yeah, they laugh, but they are right in the midst of grief, and that evening, the next day, that grief overwhelms them. So, yeah, good point. All right, what about verse 3 there? What's he going after?
Wine or intoxication.
Yeah, really, wine is a specific intoxication. Is the philosophy of life eat, drink, and be merry? Is that what we pursue? Is that what we go after? Let me ask you this. Is there a place for wine?
What we're afraid to say.
Okay. Well, good Bible students are not afraid to say. 1 Timothy. Yeah, you thought I was setting a trap for you, didn't you? 1 Timothy chapter 5. Remember what he says here? Yeah, 1 Timothy 5 verse 23. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for your stomach's sake and your frequent infirmities. Is there a place for wine?
Medicinal purposes.
Okay.
And it was also used as a way of sanitization or disinfectant.
Okay. The Bible acknowledges, see, there's some people, and I'm thinking particularly of Jehovah's Witness religion, they will not take medicine. They don't take it. They're like, no, we can't have any of that. They won't have blood transfusions and things like that. They eschew all of that. And there's a place for painkillers, right? You go in, you have surgery, there's a place for that. And he told Timothy, use the wine in that time. That was his medicine to take care of his digestive issues, whatever those were. Today we have other things we use. Timothy wasn't taking it to get intoxicated, and Paul wouldn't be recommending it to him. Timothy, you go and get intoxicated and that'll take care of all your problems there. That's not what he's talking about. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 verse 3, he says, I went to gratify my flesh with wine does getting inebriated, is that where life is? Or, during the New Testament times, this would be called Epicureanism. You satisfy the flesh. So is that good? Is that the right thing? Yes.
That's what I was going to mention. I almost see it as if he's not only literally talking about wine, but also anything else that could give pleasure to the flesh, things that are luxury or something else.
Yes, in fact, through this whole section, is a great representative of it. He's talking about living a life of luxury. I got all the money in the world, and I'm going to go after it and pursue it. So, yeah, but go back to Proverbs. See, the same writer, Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1 says what? Proverbs 20, verse 1. Who will read that?
Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise.
Okay. He's echoing what he's saying over here in Ecclesiastes. Look, I went after wine, and I did it while guarding my heart with wisdom. So he's saying I didn't become a drunkard, and I was just completely wasted every day. He's saying I went and pursued it, to drink at parties and to drink with people and to drink through the day or whatever. I did that, and you know what? That wasn't the answer. That's not where life is good, if you will. In Proverbs chapter 23, this is a longer reading. You might just mark this, but Proverbs 23, 29 to 35, he goes through an extended description there. Who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contentions, who has complaints, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eyes. Those who linger long at the wine and go in search of mixed wine. And so he warns against that, saying don't go after those things. Again, he's addressing that idea, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. No, that's not life. Mike.
I think what we were talking about was that he's going from one extreme to the other. You have all this wisdom that you think would be really good. That's not the meaning of life. Well, that leads to madness. And then you have this other extreme that you can live this boisterous life if you wish. That's not the meaning of life, because it brings its folly also. And so as we kind of go through all of these different avenues, going to the extreme on all of this stuff is you're missing the point of life altogether.
Yeah, you're missing the point of life. And part of what he's saying here, particularly in verse 3, he says, look, I went to gratify my flesh with wine while guiding my heart with wisdom. So with this wisdom, I'm going to go and methodically pursue these things. And I found out that's not the way to do it. He didn't come completely unhinged is what he's indicating there. But look, I did that and till I might see what was good for the sons of men under heaven. And what was his conclusion on that? As we know in his discussion of the context here. It's not good for the sons of men to pursue wine. That's not the direction you go. That's not where life is. It's not where wisdom is. Not where the purpose and meaning of life is.
I think there's something also in that verse, though, where it talks about the folly, that he's saying that it's all the wine's wrong, but it's also wrong to ignore the realities of life. So I think Mike's right. He goes to the other extreme. I know all these things, but I applied wine with wisdom and ignored the realities of life, which is that living in folly, ignoring the truth about life. That didn't work. So knowing it can cause madness, but ignoring it is vanity too. Knowing those things and trying to ignore them, which I think that's what he's saying in this verse. It's useless.
Yeah. So verses 4 through 7, what's he then discuss? So he talks about the comedy, laughter, talks about wine, and now what does he talk about? Verses 4 through 7. Possessions, works, things that he pursues after. We talked about Solomon building a grand house, and he had lots of buildings that he made in his time as king. He says he has vineyards and gardens and orchards. One of the things that, of course, the ancient kings did is who had the greatest, grandest garden, right? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon would be the ultimate example of, that was a status symbol. And he says, I went after that. I built gardens and water pools. There were great engineering feats in and of themselves. He had servants who served him, male and female servants born into his house. So that's another mark of wealth and power, is how many servants do you have? And then he says, I had herds and flocks, more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. So the greatest king as far as possessions and works and buildings and all those types of things. And what do those all end up in? What's the good in them, ultimately? Let me ask you this. And this actually addresses a later question, does our society tell us there's fulfillment in having stuff, buildings, people under you, serving you, people giving you attention, doing great feats and accomplishments? I mean, we have all kinds of awards, from awards in the entertainment industry to awards in business to awards in patriotic duty. The Congressional Medal of Honor is the highest military award. I forget what the civilian equivalent is to that. But we got all these things that we pin on people, we tag people, give them medals and certificates. The Olympics, give them these medals, all these things. What does all that do? He says in verse 8, I also gathered for myself silver and gold and special treasures of kings of the provinces. So what could he do with that, Hank?
When he dies, someone else is going to take it and they'll sell it. Or if you ever watch that pawn show, somebody bring in great-grandfather's medal from World War II or prize rifle or what, your son may not do it, but who says his son?
Somebody's going to.
Yes.
And he talks about that quite a bit through the book about, who knows, the guy coming after you's a fool, and he's probably got Rehoboam in mind, but anyway. So wealth doesn't satisfy. Gold, silver, treasures. Let me ask you this. Why is gold so valuable? Because we decided it is. 100% arbitrary. Diamonds, 100% arbitrary. We tell ourselves, well, this is a rare precious metal. This is a rare gem, right? And so we assign a value to that. If you're in a desert, you've been out there for a week and you don't have any water, what's worth more? 10 pounds of gold or a gallon of water? Right? You cannot take that gold to sustain your life in a situation like that, right? Well, somebody say, well, the merchant coming by, the caravan coming by, you could trade the gold for the water, all that. But that's not the point. You can't eat gold, you can't drink gold, other than like if Moses crushed it up in the water, but you have to put it in water to drink it, but that's another story. The usefulness of it, gold for tools is terrible. They don't make tools really out of gold, not anything that you would build a building with or, saw lumber with or anything like that. It's not useful for structures, really. It's plating, but it's not useful to build a structure. Iron's much better, more abundant. Rocks are better than jewels to build buildings or to lay roads. You don't lay a bed of diamonds down to build a road or try to build a wall out of rubies. It just doesn't make sense. So it's all arbitrary, and we need to keep that in mind. He talks about here about how he has male and female singers. What would we call that? A chorus, a choir. He had his own personal... Just think about it. Solomon at 2 a.m. could be like, I can't sleep. Go wake them up. Get them in here. I want to be entertained. Instead of flipping on Netflix or whatever. Right? That's what he would do. So he had all that at his disposal. He says it's not any good. Now, the latter part of that, the New King James has musical instruments of all kinds. Now, some of you have probably already seen this in your translations, the ESV, the NASB, that singers, men and women, many concubines, the delights of the children of men. The original word there, it's questionable exactly what it means, but whichever way it was, and I tend to think it is the concubines, because this is where he would address it in the letter, he's basically saying, look, he had 1,000 women, 700 wives, 300 concubines. What's the purpose of a concubine? Let's be real. What's the purpose?
Sexual gratification.
Sexual gratification. The wives, you could maybe explain away, well, those were political alliances, and he's shoring up his connections and his network with all these kings and rulers and important, powerful people. There's only one reason for a concubine. And he's saying, that's not what life's about, but there's a lot of people think that's what life's about. No, life's not about the sexual gratification, the temporary physical pleasure. It does nothing for the soul. So, verses 9 through 11, he basically says, look, whatever I put my eyes on, whatever I wanted to pursue, I went after it. I went after it with gusto. And how did things end up for him?
There was no profit under the sun.
No profit. All the things I had toiled in. There are some men who spend their lifetime building a business because they see that as their legacy. What happens when they die? Kind of tying all this in together, we're just about out of time. You think about somebody like a Steve Jobs, idolized. I mean, he is literally idolized. And he died of pancreatic cancer and left his legacy in the hands of others, and they're doing whatever they want to do with it. Is that really meaningful in the end? There's really no meaning in that in the end. And that's why you see so many rich, powerful, famous people, and all these things are known for and praised for and looked up to for, why their lives are such an absolute mess. Because there's no true meaning there. And they can't find it, and they just drive themselves, like Solomon has explored here, they drive themselves into these things, and it's all empty. It's vanity. But Satan will use these things to distract us, to ensnare us in this world, and Solomon is warning us against it. Don't go down that path. There's no meaning, fulfillment, true fulfillment. It's not there. So beware. All right, any other thoughts? All right, thank y'all. Lord willing, pressing on in chapter 2 next week.